This is Business Therapy, healing businesses from the inside out through communication and emotional intelligence. I'm Diane Hansen, management consultant, and with me co-host Christine Salvo, therapist, certified mediator, and certified hypnotherapist.
Good morning. Hello, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. And today I am just so pleased to have with us Fabian Geierhalter. Born in Vienna, Austria, brand strategist and creative director Fabian Geierhalter is a prolific author and speaker on the subject of branding. He is the founder and principal of Los Angeles-based brand consulting, Finian, where he works hands-on with startups of any size and age on crafting strategic, verbal, and visual brand clarity. He is a columnist for Forbes, and his words appeared in the likes of Inc., Los Angeles Times, The Washington Post, and Entrepreneur. Welcome to the show, Fabian.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yay. What an impressive introduction there. I'm so excited for our talk today.
Thank you. Yeah, me too.
And you are a brand strategist. And as we go through this thing called life and work and business, sometimes we ourselves are personal brands, and brands are all about alignment. And one thing we were speaking about as I was interviewing you to be on this episode was how our choices have a lot to do with our personal brands. How is that, Fabian?
Well, we talked about this idea that I brought up that you should say no more often. And it is kind of bizarre because usually, in a lot of business management books, and especially in the startup world, the whole idea of fail forwards and, say yes to everything and just try things. It's kind of the hype today, but really what I learned over my sadly decades of doing what I'm doing, I learned that in the beginning when you set out to do anything, I mean, for me, it was starting my agency. I was so excited. I said yes to pretty much everything, right? You get an opportunity and you just feel it's like a human instinct. You feel like you're needed, you're wanted, and you say yes. And the problem is, if you're a yes sayer, you're basically drifting away from what is really at the core of your philosophy or your business ideology. You just keep saying yes. And you don't really filter it. So I start with a no. And then if people come back to me, begging, then I start thinking about, oh, wait a minute, maybe there is a way to actually make this work. So I think the idea of starting with no instead of starting with yes is interesting.
I think that's really interesting. So I take a similar philosophy when I'm talking to people about dating. It's similar. A job interview, right? It's a job interview. It is a job interview. Say no before you say yes. Don't get too excited too early because you're really sifting this out. You have to feel into it a little bit, right?
And when you think about this is a really great analogy. And I love that analogy of dating anyways, with business overall, right? Because so much works in the same way. But I think that's when dating apps came out. With dating apps, you basically get all of these pre-qualifiers. So you're not just going out on dates and you're hanging out at a random bar or the disco, when you're young and, and you just hope to meet the right person. You actually have all of these criteria to go through. And I think that all of us, in order to strive, personally, but mainly in business, we have to have criteria, right? In order to grow a healthy business. And I think that's why, to me, it's once I started saying no to opportunities that were just slightly off, right? Like either they were a little bit outside of our expertise, but in the beginning we said yes because we're like, we can do this. And then we learn it on the job and we keep expanding our teams and we keep doing things that we shouldn't really be doing, right? That might not be smart business moves. And, you take on cheap clients, you have staff stay too late because of a mismanaged client project. But all of this starts with saying yes to the wrong opportunities.
Yeah, it's sounding to me like it's diluted in a way. Like you start off with a very concentrated idea and message and purpose and goal. And then through time, you just kind of dilute it to where it's almost not even taking its original form anymore. But also the consequences are that everyone's kind of stretched and all of a sudden, you're not really making that profit you meant to, but you're working a lot.
Right, exactly. I think it all comes down to, in the end, once you start gaining clarity in your business, right? And once you have clarity, you can really have focus. And once you have focus, you start saying no because that comes naturally with it, right? Because you know exactly what you do, for whom you do it, and what your bigger purpose is. And at that point, you just start saying no to anything that does not fit into this tiny little niche. At least that's how I progressed in my career. And it is such a huge relief to start saying no.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a little curious here because you help small businesses. I'm curious what your feedback is when you start telling people to say no, because just like you said, it's that ultimate anticipation. Even when you just, let's say you ended a long relationship and you started dating again, you say yes to everyone. It's like, wow, look at all the possibilities. Where have I been? And then all of a sudden you're like, and I know why you're single, and I know why you're single, and I know why you're single. And kind of the same thing with your clientele.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, what you just said is interesting, right? You do that until you're divorced like 2-3 times, and then you don't, then you don't say maybe to even anyone, right? So
I love it.
Even though I work with a lot of startups and a lot of entrepreneurs and founders and younger companies, I also work a lot with Fortune 500s. And now what I do is I kind of morph the two. I know that founders want to work really, really quickly, and for them, of course, the idea is yes, yes, yes. But what I do in my first sessions, and I call it a session. It's kind of like therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I even just released a book called Brand Therapy Book, right? Because it's so much like that. It's so much about sitting on the couch and actually listening to a founder talk about the business and where they want to go and how they feel like they can make a difference. And then really you start positioning them, right? So it's brand positioning, and really positioning is nothing else than focusing. It's really saying we are a company that is only good for this type of client. We only give them these type of benefits, and we will stand out because, and then it's like Simon Sinek's big why, like, why do you exist? What is the bigger purpose of the company? And once you have that figured out, once you have that brand positioning down, the founders themselves, so even small businesses, they're on a high. I mean, they really know this is it. This is the true north. This is what we want to do with our business. And at that point, I don't even need to brainwash them because they told me, right, like what they're all about, and then that's kind of, that's kind of like their North Star. And that's, there's so many marketing terms, but it's really their guiding light of like, this is where we need to go. And at that point, I don't need to tell them to stop saying yes. Because they will just start with no immediately.
So is there a metric to follow to get to the yes? Is there some sort of way to self-score, or there's some way to become more clear to see what is aligned with that yes?
I think, a good example is when I changed, I ran a small agency. We were good, like 12, 15 people at our height. And that's when I started to change the agency to be a small consultancy, to have focus. I actually had a consultant in my agency, and he actually worked with me through this. And then the problem is, once you do this transition of being, let's say in my case, I was not a specialist. I was, we did graphic design, we did branding, we did websites. It was kind of like a commodity, like a lot of marketing, a lot of design. And then after my transition, I knew that I had to focus on only one client, and I had to focus on only one message, right? So for us, it was all about brand strategy, brand launches. And so what you learn is that whenever I start writing a blog piece or a piece for Forbes or whatever it is, right? Or just a little tweet or a retweet something, when you start looking at the content that you create, you have to force yourself to, because everyone has so much to say about so many things, right? But you have to force yourself to only stay on that subject, and knowing that that's what people on the other end want to hear from you, right? And this is a huge thing. And I think social media is a great example of that, because once you get into this habit of thinking about, and I always say, like, don't think of your audience, think like your audience, right? So if you start thinking like your audience, and you put yourself into their shoes, you start giving them advice rather than, just quick tidbits of advice that they would actually need in their situation. So it helps you tremendously to say no to all these other thoughts that come up that you would just want to spread because you think you're also smart, or you think something is also interesting, right, that you need to share.
Yeah, that's so true. I'm so smart and I'm so interesting. Let me share all of my knowledge. And I mean, Diane and I have talked about this before, that kind of turns into what's called flooding, right? You just flood people with information, and all of a sudden they're overwhelmed. They don't know what they're doing. And instead of, like you say, you focus on the one thing and you tackle it, it's like, is, and we start to kind of get into this panic mode of there's so much to do and I've done everything wrong and where do I start? So
it's so true. And yeah, I call it the fire hose effect. So as a consultant, you fire hose and here's all of the things spread across the whole gamut of what you want to discuss that you're maybe not doing, not aligned with, whatever. Here's some best practices. Here's some more best practices. Have some more best practices. And then they realize that they can't do it themselves and that they need a consultant to really help them with that. And I call it the fire hose. and but it's interesting when you have that level of focus to where you're very clear on exactly the value proposition that you provide and how you're going to communicate that value proposition and what that person really on the other side is aligned with what you're saying. I think that one of the most deadly things to business that is still being practiced today is the elevator pitch. And having that elevator pitch not be aligned with the other person's value, what the other person wants, what the other person is on the hook for. They're either going to get fired for or promoted because they did it. So I think in a lot of ways we, when we're saying yes to a lot of things to bring it around, we're ignoring our own value proposition.
I really like that. I think that's interesting. And what you brought up with the elevator pitch, I think that was a really interesting statement because to a certain extent, I still believe in the elevator pitch, but I always say that the elevator pitch should be a question. It should be very much, something because that way, because it's hard for me to know a stranger. But if you kind of like bring up a very vague idea that is combined with a question, and then they basically, buy into what you're about to say, that helps people get into, get the elevator pitch out of the elevator into like,
exactly.
the top
and
suite.
Get it out of the monologue. This is not Shakespeare. We're not paying you to deliver the next greatest monologue on stage here.
Nothing should ever be a monologue, right? I mean, that's in business. I mean, in business too, right? I mean, that's the big thing. That's why social media is so amazing, and all of these brands that understand social media are selling so much more because it's a conversation. Even, I mean, buying is a conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Selling is a conversation.
Yeah, it is. And to be out of conversation with yourself is to really be out of conversation with the world. You wonder why things aren't sticking for you. You wonder why people aren't getting what you have to offer. Perhaps then it's time to turn inward and get into conversation with yourself. And, when you and I talked on the phone prior to the show, I was really aligned with what you were saying because a really great tip that you might be not that clear is that you're like, yes, I'll just figure out how to do it. Okay. Yeah. Oh, that opportunity came to me. Yeah. I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. And what you find is that, well, when you're good, opportunity comes to you regardless. But when you're good, but unfocused, a stress comes toward you at lightning speed because you're just so fragmented.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, the problem is if you keep saying yes to all of these mediocre things or things that don't fit into your life or the way that you want to build your life and your business, then the right opportunity comes across. You're not even capable of saying yes because you're too busy doing all these little things that you should have never even done in the first place, right? And I think especially now, right? I mean, we're recording this during COVID-19 still. I mean, who knows how long this will go? But there's a lot of business owners that don't have that much to do, right? I mean, a lot of them are frantic, which is, the hospitality industry, restaurants, etc. Trying to stay afloat. And then there's the other part, which is consultants and people that create advice for people, and suddenly they don't have clients or agencies, right? And they don't have as many clients. And I think this is a really good time to practice this idea that we talk about right now, right? Because this is where everyone is really down, right? Where everyone is hungry for new projects to generate revenue, to get back into things. But I think this is where the ones that are really well positioned and the ones that really know who they are and who they cater their offering to and the type of work that they do, those are the ones that will shine afterwards because they're not going to take on everything. Even now, even if they're currently just living off a payroll protection program or whatever, right? You have to be so good in just saying, no, I have to stay aligned with this until the very, very last minute. And that's going back to how a founder works, right? Where they're going to live out of their van and they're still going to hope that Google buys their product or whatever it is, right? But
Oh,
I think there's a
absolutely.
lot to be learned from that, right? That there's this perseverance that is going to pay off if you're staying extremely focused.
There's this clear alignment, this tenacity, this lighthouse, this guiding light, this vision, whatever you call it, that keeps it going. I think that what I have witnessed is when people get anxious and fearful, that whatever I need to say yes to, I'll just say yes to it, or whatever I need to do, I'll just do it. And maybe it's on the way, it's not, but I'm still putting food in my mouth. And I remember a story about Robert Kiyosaki and his wife eating Kentucky Fried Chicken in their car, and basically deciding that they were going to spend their last $5 on this $5 box or whatever it was, and share chicken in their car, because he had just sent out to gas stations, which is where he was putting Rich Dad Poor Dad at the time. He had just put out the last of what he could afford to fund into the gas stations, and then it was pray time. But it was interesting because instead of losing focus, instead of going off the track, he really stayed on it to the point where they were eating fried chicken out of their car and celebrating that we just put it in the gas stations, it's going to go. And kind of having that faith behind the vision that it's going to go, and we're still remaining committed to the cause, so to speak. So really taking it not just from a knowing level, but to a cause level. Like this is my focus. This is my cause. This is the song I sing and why I exist.
It's purpose, right? I think it's an overused word too in marketing, and right, but really that's what it comes down to. If you realize that this is the purpose of your endeavor, maybe your company or your personal brand, you just have, you just naturally have to only focus on that. I mean, there shouldn't even be a question that there's anything else.
So how do you say no gracefully?
Or do you need to? That's the question, right? Because look, I have a good example. I just had a client, contact me, and they said, look, a potential client. They said, look, we need you to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, before our phone call. And I said, my company has a protocol to not do that. Of course, my company is me plus one person, so I can change my protocol however I want to, right? But I said, it makes no sense if we don't talk about what you need, and if we're even a perfect match to sign an NDA. And we went back and forth, and now we didn't have that phone call today, right? But to me, that is just logical, right? So I'm saying no. I feel like I didn't say, like, no, I don't want to have that call. I just said, no, it only works a certain way. And I think it's the same thing with every time I say no. People would come to me and they say, I want to be a guest on your show. I'm sure it happens to you, right? And I say, well, you're not, it's just not a perfect fit because we only talk to investors and founders, and you happen to be not one of those, or we already had so many consumer products on, we need someone else. I think there's always a way, and it's not even an excuse, because if you say no, and you say no because you're determined to only say yes to the right things, you can always talk about that this is not that thing, right? Like, sorry, but you're not that. We're only doing that. And I think that is super important, because there's a lot of people that are very adamant or afraid of finding that focus and specializing, right? Specializing in a niche. May it be a consumer company, may it be a consultant, may it be an agency. Like, we only do X for Y, right? Like this is the only thing we do. But what happens, you create more opportunities, because those people will sooner or later get to know you, and they know you are the specialist to do that. So every time I say no to someone that doesn't fit my criteria, I feel like they feel so impressed that I say no to an opportunity, especially their opportunity, right? That then they will remember that, oh, but this guy does that one thing, right? So if anyone who wants that, they should go to this guy, because that's what he does. And he seems to be really good because he doesn't take on anything else. So I think you can definitely make it your advantage, even to the outside, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question. Do you practice this in your personal life as well?
That is an exquisite question. I hope so. I hope so. I guess this would be a time where I should get my wife, on the mic here and ask her. I believe so. I think it's kind of like I think at some point it becomes a mindset. That you just do that, right? But of course, I believe that everything is a little bit easier in business than in personal life, right? Because I think in business, it's very easy to set boundaries and to set, this is the positioning, these are the values, and it's on the wall, right? But as a person, you kind of, you're changing constantly, even though businesses do too. It's a little bit, it's definitely more organic naturally for us to kind of like get through moods and get through certain zones. And, we're all doing COVID-19 now. We're all kind of like in a certain zone, and things are a little bit different, right? We eat things we shouldn't normally, eat. We don't do certain things. We do other things that we, it's so I think to answer your question, I don't know. I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, wherever we go, there we are, right? And so when I'm learning to say no, I like to call it an art, the art of saying no, because culturally we're not necessarily taught that. We're all a little bit of a people pleaser. We're kind of told that's how, you get along, and you say thank you for every gift, and you help every time you can. And that's the fundamentals of trying to be a good person, right? But there is a line where being a good person actually hurts you in some ways, right? Because you don't have good boundaries, or you haven't learned how to say no. And then, so professionally, I think that grace that you've learned, which is really like, you're just not a good fit, you can use personally too. Of, hey, this was family time I cut out. And yeah, there's this other thing seems really interesting right now, but I already I already promised my time over here, and learning that art of saying no too, which a lot of people struggle with in and out.
I love that you spin it to something that is, that is most probably the hardest thing to do in personal life, right? Is it to say no to friends or family for favors or get-togethers, or, whatever it might be. And that perfectly exemplifies, the idea of how it's more difficult. But there too, right? I mean, if your neighbor says, hey, I'm doing this political fundraiser, join me. And you're like, well, I'm not into your political viewpoint. What do you do, right? But I mean, I think in the end, we can all be honest in a graceful way, where it doesn't destroy relationships. I think we're all adults, and we can all do this, because on the one hand, no one should ever ask that of your neighbor anyways.
I think I've done a very good job personally of making my calendar the bad guy. So I always say my heart says yes, but my calendar says no.
Nice. Very nice.
Even though I put it on my calendar, it does exist because I placed it there. My calendar is the one who's saying no, not me. But then how do I then frame it? Because I am the person who put the calendar together, and not loading myself up just to be able to say no. So that's another thing.
So when I used to teach this social skills class, I would say, no is just as good of an answer as yes. And here's why. You have to expect to hear no. And just as much as we all want to hear yes, we have to learn how to hear no. So it's not just about saying it, it's actually receiving it too. And one of my favorite examples is, like you said, you ask a friend to move and your friend goes, yeah, hesitating, shows up grumpy, doesn't really help, and actually could damage the relationship, because you're going like, hey, I needed you to come with some energy today, and you're kind of dragging and you're holding us back, and clearly you don't want to be here. And now we actually have tension, rather than that person going, you know what? I've had a really busy week. I just need some me time. I'm going to say no. And if I happen to have extra energy, I'll just show up and help. I'm just not even going to tell you. How do you feel about that? So there's the potential of really preserving that relationship in saying no. Because if you say no to me, I'm just going to keep going down the list. But if you say yes, I'm going to count on you. And the no and the yes really do matter in those ways. Totally. And I'm sure in business too, right? In business too.
Totally agreed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's like, by saying no, you actually give people choices. You give people the data that they need to make a choice about how to proceed next. And in your moving example, like you said, they continue to go down the list. Whereas if you said yes, but your heart wasn't in it, there'd be a number of things that could happen. You could find a conflict and not show up. You could go with low energy, or you could go and resent it and build that resentment from the inside of you, which may not really create a conflict in the moment, but it creates a conflict long term. So by being clear and by saying no to that which is not in alignment with that clarity, you really do a service to the person who's asking you, because it's not in alignment. Often before I say yes to something, I will feel into it. I will feel into the next step, and I'll say, that's a wonderful idea. So I'll compliment the that's a wonderful idea. Could you give me a day and I'll say it, just to feel into it. I'll be totally hippie about it, just to feel into it and see if that's the right direction for both of us. And you do the same.
Do you do something similar? Do you have a similar perspective with business, Fabian, when it comes to like, no is sometimes a great answer, especially for the other person?
Well, it always is, right? Because if we're focused on one thing and that's what we're really good at and that's what we excel at, then why would I give you something else, right? Because it's not going to be A+, right? It's not going to be, premium. It's going to be whatever, right? It's going to, so it's just honesty. And back to something that Diane said before, and I really like that, when you blame your calendar for, well, it's the calendar, it's not me. I never said yes, it just happens to be there. I think one of the big things to say no to is long meetings, right? Like 1 hour meetings. It's and just say, and I start doing that. Just say every meeting is 20 minutes. Or 15 minutes. Even though we all know we can't get it done, we're going to get so much more done in those 15 minutes and have another 15 minutes meeting instead of having an hour meeting where 20 minutes we talk about how everyone's doing, which I love how everyone's doing, and it is important. But if you start getting, you can have a 15, 20 minutes just about that, right? But I think that's going to help the calendars, because that is a big problem. I think it's a big problem of society these days, right? That we just have too much going on. And I think if we just limit these times that we say yes to lengthy meetings, that helps. And I think now during COVID-19, we're learning that, right? Because people don't have the patience on Zoom to hang around, because it's different than being in a conference room. And I think everything now, we all learn, how we can actually get a lot more done sometimes, even though of course we miss that. I don't want to feel like someone who has no empathy here. It's like I come across as like this really harsh guy.
You people, people are not terrible.
It comes with my German accent. See, I blame that. It's a stereotype.
Oh my goodness, that is so funny. Yeah, it's true. And this time in our lives is giving us a new perspective on what does matter. And we've talked about that in recent past episodes, that it's the trimming and the clearing and the closening to oneself. And now this, takes it that next level deeper to taking that action, really, to say an active no to that which does not align. And then I think there is, we could probably do a whole other episode, which we probably will right after this, of just facing down yourself when you feel guilty about your no. And you feel like you're obligated, or you feel like you're a bad person if you say no, or, all of these social constructs that are placed upon us to be yes people. I used to work with someone in the personal development industry who used to say yes now and then figure out how. And oh boy, how much stress did that create in my life? Say yes now, then figure out how.
And that's exactly it, right? I mean, that's what I was living for the first 10 years of my career. And I had a design agency with like 10 young people, and we were all kind of just flying, by the seat of our pants. And everyone was happy, but everyone worked late, right? We were always like hustling to get the right clients, and and it makes sense because it's not built on that foundation of very clear focus and clarity again. And that's when the no comes in.
Yeah. I love it.
I do too. I love that you're focusing on the message on almost the counterculture, but framing it in a way of just let it be true and do what you do best. I think that's the simplest form of this message, is do what you do best.
Exactly.
Don't do the stuff you aren't that great at. Okay, so for our listeners that heard about you and everything that you're doing today, how may they find you in the future? What is your website?
Oh, thank you for asking. They can go to Finien.com. That's FINIEN.com. That's the easiest place to find me.
And what is the name of your book that you said you have just finished?
It's the Brand Therapy book, perfectly titled for this show. And you can find it on Amazon or brandtherapybook.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Fabian, for being on Business Therapy. It's been a pleasure having you.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been Business Therapy, healing businesses from the inside out through communication and emotional intelligence. I'm Diane Dye Hansen, management consultant.
Christine Salvo, marriage and family therapist, hypnotherapist, and mediator. Have the best week. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great morning.